What's going on, everybody? It's Clint with the Die Hard MMA podcast, and this is the Total Takedown for UFC Vegas 37. We have got a large card to talk about today, so if you're here, I'm going to assume you know how this show works. Let's get right on into it. We're talking overs and unders. First fight of the night, Emily Whitmire taking on Hannah Goldy. Women's MMA fight. Neither of these women have finishing power. Submission is the only way that this fight is ending. Total here set at 2.5. Over is minus 330. Under his plus 270. And like I said, there's no knockout coming. There's more than likely no submission coming. And if there is a submission coming, it's probably only from the Whitmire side. So I'm pretty sure this one is headed to the judges' scorecards and it's going to get hairy. So minus 330 if you're looking for a parlay piece. I honestly don't hate that one because that one's pretty risk adverse from the way these two women fight. Bantamweight matchup here, Gustavo Lopez taking on Hailey Alatang. This is a fight I'm very excited for. These two are probably going to go to absolute war here. Total set 2.5 on this one. Over is minus 200. The under 2.5 is plus 170, and I would not hate a look at the violence here. Now, both these guys are durable. Both these guys are tough. Both these guys can grapple, so there's enough reasons for me to feel like they can both survive what the other have to offer that I don't think it's a home run smash spot for the under, but they are both more than capable of finishing. We've seen Gustavo Lopez choke people out. We've seen him rock people and knock them out. Hailey Alatang fires absolute bombs, and he's training over at Fight Ready, so I expect him to be in absolute peak physical condition for this one, but the wrestling is a big concern here because Hailey Alatang is such a strong grappler. We could see this fight play out on the mat and in control positions against the fence, so not one that I'm looking to smash. I lean under 2.5 at that plus money number, but not one I feel safe in actually putting my money on. Welterweight fight here, Impa Kasanganay taking on Carlston Harris. And this one is really interesting to me. The total set at 2.5, under is plus 125, over is minus 145. And I've been scratching my head looking at this fight literally the entire week because we know Harris comes out to grapple. We know he's a chain wrestler. He likes to club and sub people, knock him to the floor, work from there. Impa Kasanganay, while he's still trying to figure out exactly what he wants to be when it comes to his MMA fighting style, he either wins by decision or submission. So this guy could be physically strong enough to stuff the wrestling of Harris, but he's got poor takedown defense, so maybe he can't handle the chain wrestling if it hits the mat. Carlston Harris either TKOs or subs people left and right. That's what he does. I could see this fight ending in a submission, and that under 2.5 has me very, very much intrigued. We just saw Impa get knocked out, so I'm not sure he's going to go out there and be looking for a brawl or anything like that. Grappling is definitely going to be emphasized in this fight. Could Impa get into a dominant wrestling position and then maybe find a submission on Harris? Not necessarily likely, and I feel like both these guys could be durable enough for it to edge to the over. So, I mean, it's hard to argue either way on this one if we're being completely honest. Lots of questions about this one. I'm going to go ahead and say under 2.5 because I think Harris is kind of a runaway freight train at this point, and I do think he's capable of getting Impa to the ground, and once Impa is in a bad position on the ground, I do think Harris has a significant advantage. So I'll say the under 2.5, but again, not one I'm rushing to the window for. Erin Blanchfield taking on Sarah Alpar in a women's flyweight fight. Coming up next here on this one, we have a total set at 2.5. Over is minus 185, under is plus 160, and this is one of those weird ones where, while I do think there's enough of an argument to be made for the under, the finish really only comes from one side, so you might as well look for that fighters inside the distance prop and get a better number just taking that as is, because Blanchfield is the only one who's going to finish this fight. Sarah Alpar doesn't really have knockout power. She's a wrestle type of fighter, and while she does have some submissions, she is not submitting the more skilled, more talented Erin Blanchfield if this thing does hit the ground. In fact, she's going to be the one, in my opinion, that is at risk if that were to happen. Erin's got some pop on her punches too, so there is the club and sub or TKO opportunity for her. I think Erin Blanchfield inside the distance, if you're going to look for under, is the way to go. More than likely, Sarah Alpar will be able to handle this thing, and if it doesn't end in a submission, it probably ends up going over. So yikes. All of these starting fights are really sketchy in my opinion when it comes to the total. I'm going to say under just because I do think Erin Blanchfield is good enough to submit and finish Sarah Alpar, but I'm not going to bet the under 2.5 because, again, criteria. You got to have both fighters capable of cashing the under, and I don't think we have that here in this spot. You'll get a better number on Erin Blanchfield inside the distance. So I'll say under, but definitely not one I'm going to be betting. Really interesting bantamweight fight coming up next. JP Buys taking on Montel Jackson. I talked about this one at length on the podcast. I'm extremely interested in this fight. Total set at 2.5, and this total is definitely one where you're banking on your fighter. Montel Jackson is big for the division. He hits really hard. Submission specialist. I'm sorry, not submission specialist, but very, very good offensive submissions. He's long, he's lanky. He can use those for chokes. He also has a solid wrestling game. Now, JP Buys is a first-string wrestler, but all we've seen him try to do in the UFC is strike, and he really paid for that in his UFC debut. He's moving up a weight class. There's a big question as to whether or not he can handle the size of Montel Jackson in this fight, so lots of questions, and the total here, I think, really sides with the fighter, because if you think Montel Jackson's going to win this fight, then he probably just handles JP Buys and boots him out of there in the first round or two with those big meat gloves that he calls fists. JP Buys, on the other hand, if you think he's got a shot in this fight, if you think he's got any opportunity at all, you think he probably grapples and survives in this fight and gets this thing over. So I'm noticing now that actually the total for some people might have it marked at the 1.5 round as opposed to the 2.5. The over 1.5 would be minus 145. The under 1.5 is plus 125. The argument still holds true. I think the over is more than likely to hit here in this spot. Everyone's got a bad taste in their mouth for JP Buys in this spot, but I think that he is going to show us that he's at least a capable fighter in this spot. I do think he's going to be able to have an offensive wrestling advantage. We've seen Montel Jackson get pressed up against the fence. We've seen him get taken down and grinded on. And if JP Buys can just survive one round, I think that over cashes. So again, not one that I'm going to be betting, but I do lean to the over 1.5 at minus 145 in this spot. Lightweight fight, Nikolas Motta taking on Cameron VanCamp. Short notice fill in here, so I'm not sure we even have a line on it. Let me check here real quick. There we go. We do. We are lucky for this one. All right. Total here, it looks like set is 1.5. Over is minus 180. Under is plus 158. Now, I actually found a 2.5 was the first line that came available to me, and I did go ahead and already take it. The over 2.5 is plus 100. The under looks like it's minus 130. I got minus 120 on the under 2.5 as soon as it dropped. Or actually, I might have got minus 115 now that I'm saying that. And I think violence all day in this spot. Nikolas Motta has a serious striking advantage here in this spot. He's got heavy hands. He knocks people out all the time. Cameron VanCamp has been finished before, but he's also cutting weight to a weight class he hasn't competed at for quite some time. He's been fighting at 165 and 170 for his last, 4 or 5 fights. So now he's dropping down to 155 for the first time in a long time, and that will likely mean one of two things. Either he comes down and he looks like an absolute monster, has a size and strength advantage, or he struggles with that weight cut and he's going to be easy pickings for a guy that's got a hand speed advantage. So I think this is violence all over it. We've seen Nikolas Motta taken down and have some trouble on the ground, and that's kind of what Cameron VanCamp does. So if he's going to win, I think it's by ground and pound TKO or submission early, or Nikolas Motta is going to have that speed and hand advantage, and I see him boxing up VanCamp until he breaks in the second or third round. Under 2.5, violence, I've already bet it. I like that spot. Lightweight fight up next, Zhu Rong taking on Brandon Jenkins. And this is another short notice fill-in fight, and I have yet to get to Brandon Jenkins in my tape study. Now, this is the Brandon Jenkins from Bellator that we cashed in on just a couple of weeks ago. We bet this kid. I like what I see from this kid, but I need to do my due diligence and make sure I remind myself of his exact skill set, go back and make sure everything up here checks out with what we've actually seen him do. Zhu Rong, big, tall, long, lots of knockout power, really young kid, lots of opportunity for this guy going forward. Total set at 2.5. Again, hard for me to comment just because I haven't done my tape study yet, but I kind of feel like violence in this spot makes some sense. Zhu Rong is a big favorite. Brandon Jenkins is a plus 260 underdog. Total, though, is minus 105 to the over 2.5, minus 125 to the under 2.5. So if you're expecting a short notice guy to come in, maybe a fireworks type of fighter, he leaves openings for himself to get finished. He also has the upside of finishing his opponent. So like I said, I think that violence is probably the way to look, but I need to do my research before I can really make a bet in that spot. Women's bantamweight fight to close out the preliminary card is Pannie Kianzad taking on Raquel Pennington. And I have a few questions about this fight. The total is minus 335 to the over 2.5. Classic women's MMA. Under is going to be plus 295. And We have seen a couple of women recently that take these long layoffs and they come back and they look like absolute monsters. The elite of the division, they take a break, they reassess, they make some adjustments, and then they come back and they just beat the brakes off of somebody that's not on their level. And I kind of feel like that's what we're going to see on Saturday. But I don't know that Raquel Pennington is going to finish Piani Kianzad because, let's be real, first off, Pennington is not a finisher to begin with, and Kianzad is not an easy person to finish. I think Rocky has a better chance of grinding this fight out, which is kind of what she tends to do. She's taken the absolute best that even Amanda Nunes had to offer, and it wasn't until the 5th round that she finally quit in that fight. So I don't see Piani Kianzad finishing Rocky in this spot. This one's going over, and again, extremely chalky, and unless Rocky shows up and pulls a new rabbit out of the hat, I don't think anybody in this fight is getting finished. So over 2.5, definitely not betting it. Middleweight fight to kick off the main card here. Joaquin Buckley taking on Antônio Arroyo. Total set at 1.5. The over is -130. The under is +110. I would lean to the over 2.5, the over 1.5 here in this spot. The only problem with that is Buckley is that kind of guy that gets in your face, stays in your face, and wings everything he's got at you. Now, we talked about how we did some Instagram stalking, and this guy's been training with a wrestling camp. I think he's actually gonna mix in some takedowns, and if he does that, Arroyo has some of the worst takedown defense we have ever seen, and he ends up on his back and has no way of getting back to his feet. He tries some submissions off of his back, and when those don't work, he curls up and lays there. So I think if Buckley decides to go for the takedowns, this over 1.5 cashes, and it cashes easily. However, if Buckley does what Buckley does, and he comes in like a runaway freight train looking for bombs, looking to put the fight away early, either one of these guys can win by knockout and absolutely ruin this bet for you. Buckley's got knockout power on the feet. We know this. Antônio Arroyo is a guy that's got serious knockout power. He's got those long, lanky legs. He can catch Buckley coming in with a knee or a head kick, kind of like we saw Buckley go down to last time. So lots of danger here in this particular spot. But if I had to make a bet, the over 1.5 at -130 is the way I'd be looking. Bantamweight fight, Nate Maness taking on Tony Gravely. Now, I've got a hot take on this one from a side perspective, but when it comes to the total, 2.5 rounds, -175 to the over, +155 to the under, and I think we could absolutely see some violence in this particular spot. I think Nate Maness is very underrated in the game. Tony Gravely is a guy that's been submitted 5 of his 6 losses, so I think there's a huge opportunity for Nate Maness to break Tony over the course of a 15-minute fight. Tony's a short, stocky fighter. He's going to have the wrestling advantage. We've seen Nate Maness take a beating and then turn the tables on his opponent once they start to slow down. His gas tank is a weapon, and Tony Gravely is known for slowing down over the course of 15 minutes. So this is going to be Tony early in a big way with that wrestling advantage. However, in the second round, I think Nate probably starts to turn it on him. In the third round, Gravely's going to be in survival mode. So it's going to come right down to that 2 minutes and 30 seconds in that third round. But I would be looking at the under 2.5 myself personally, because I do think Nate Maness is going to have the upside of finishing. But the fact that he is the type to force a technical brawl and go to war, Tony Gravely does have some big power in his hands. And if he wants to go to war, if he wants to throw down, that knockout's going to be available. Both guys can be finished. Both guys have been finished and definitely have finishing upside. The under 2.5 is in play in this spot. Light heavyweight fight, Mike Slow Rodriguez taking on Tefon Nchukwi. We've got a total set at 2.5 for this one. Over is -115, under is -105. And don't go anywhere near this fight, folks. Not the side, not the total. Don't touch this one, because if Tefon decides to grapple, we have seen exactly how that plays out with Mike Rodriguez. Rodriguez will have no answer for the takedown. He will gas out, and he will give up a finish in the second round. If Tefon doesn't grapple, which we have no reason to believe that he will, and he decides to stand with Mike Rodriguez, this could be over in one shot. Tefon Nchukwi is a guy that's got crazy power, but he's small for 205. With some extra muscle and no weight cut, we could see that power translate up to 205. He's used to fighting at 185. Mike Rodriguez, on the flip side of this thing, has a height, a reach advantage. He's a glass cannon. He absolutely has some serious offensive output, and we have seen Nchukwi hurt before. So either of these guys could finish this thing with a knockout standing if they decide to go to war. We've seen Tefon have some serious volume before, and that's been a problem for Mike Rodriguez, but we have also seen Mike Rodriguez put those Muay Thai skills to work and absolutely destroy people that decide to go toe-to-toe with him. So the under seems like it's in play in this spot. Just either way, with Tafon grappling Mike Rodriguez, tiring him out and getting it done, both guys can knock the other guy out. So I'd say under, but at the same time, we've seen both these guys survive and get to a decision in a point striking style of fight. And we could very much have that here, because if Mike Rodriguez wants to mind his P's and Q's, stay out of range, stay out of the bombs of Tafon Njoku, he could use his reach advantage and kind of pick and poke his way to a decision win. So again, there's so many questions about this fight, maybe the sketchiest fight on the card. Fireball and popcorn all day. I'm not betting this one. I will say under, I guess, because it's a low-level fight and both these guys can get finished, but yikes. Lightweight fight coming up next. Arman Tsarukyan taking on Christos Giagos. And biggest favorite on the card here is Arman Tsarukyan, but we all know that he has a tendency to just grind his opponents into oblivion. Total set at 2.5. The over is -180. The under is +158. And I think we're going to hit that critical mass point where Arman Tsarukyan eventually starts finishing his opponents. Some people never get there. Some people are just going to be grinders their entire lives, and they never get to the point of taking anybody out. But we've seen Christos Giagos have some gas tank problems before. We've seen him slow down in fights, especially wrestling heavy fights. And I think the submission is on the table for Arman Tsarukyan. And if Christos Giagos is going to win this fight, there's no way he's out grinding Arman Tsarukyan early. He's probably going to need to go for broke, but he may not believe that, and that's the problem. Because if he wants to go grind for grind with Arman Tsarukyan, thinking he'll be the one that comes out on top, there's not going to be the opportunity for the finish. So again, very sketchy position here in this spot. I'll say the over 2.5 at -180 just because we have seen this story time and time again. But if Giagos starts to slow down and gas out, don't be surprised if Arman wraps up a rear naked choke and calls this thing quits a little bit early. Women's flyweight fight. Ariane Lipski, the queen of violence, welcoming UFC newcomer Mandy Böhm to the cage. And this is a really interesting spot here. Women's MMA, we've talked about it before. Over 2.5, -220. The under 2.5, +180. And I got a hot take here, folks. I know we're not taking sides, but I think there's one side with some very clear finishing upside. Mandy Böhm has had good success on the regional scene. She's a great striker. She's got a solid skill set. I think she belongs in the UFC. But this is a massive step up in competition for her, and the competition edge lies purely with Lipski in a big way. She's fought some big names in the UFC, and she's had a little bit of an up and down road, but now she's training at ATT with some of the best women and best coaches in the world. I am expecting big time improvements here. Now, both these women are high-level strikers, but Lipski has shown that she's got legitimate knockout power in the UFC. I mean, Antonina Shevchenko wanted nothing to do with this girl on the feet when she felt that power. I think Lipski has a very high probability of giving Mandy Böhm her first loss and to do it by finish. Whether it's by knockout or submission, I actually think that she's capable of both. That remains to be seen if that pans out on Saturday, though. So I'm going to say the under 2.5. And of course, with a fighter like Mandy Böhm, she's got the opportunity to finish Lipski, although Lipski is not someone who you knock out very easily. I guess if someone was going to do it, it would be someone like Mandy. So the under 2.5 is maybe in play, but I honestly kind of like taking that dart on Lipski inside the distance at a crazy plus number and taking Mandy Böhm out of the situation there. So for the sake of the show, picking just the totals, I'm going to say under 2.5 at +180. Next up, we got the co-main event, light heavyweight fight. Ion Cuțelaba taking on Devin Brown Bear Clark. Total here set at 1.5. Over 1.5 -145. The under 1.5 +125. And this is another one of those spots where the total kind of matches your fighter. If you go Ion Cuțelaba, this guy is hell on wheels in round one. He's going to come out looking for the kill. He's a wild man. He wants to get in your face. He wants to intimidate you, hurt you, break you early, and then he has no gas left for the rest of the fight. If you're on Devin Clark, you think he weathers that early storm, uses that cage pressure, survives until later in the fight, and then eventually grinds away a decision victory. Now, Ion Cuțelaba is a guy that his back really is kind of up against the fence here. He needs a win in the worst way. He's fought the better level of competition so far in the UFC, in my opinion. He's had some decent wins where Devin Clark seems like that mid-tier gatekeeper type of guy. I don't think he's ever going to end up in the upper echelon. I think Ion Cuțelaba's got the higher ceiling. And in this must-win type of situation, I think I kind of want to back Ion. I don't think Devin Clark has the ability to finish Ion at all, but I have seen Devin Clark have some suspect durability. We did see him take a couple of big shots and grind his way through it a couple of times, but we've also seen this guy flatlined and knocked out cold very early. So I'm going to take that as his contribution to the fight, is his limited durability, and I'll say the under 1.5 at plus 125, and just say I own round 1 is kind of the spot that I'm liking here. But I'm not going to bet this one because, again, with Ion Cuțelaba, you never know. And when fighters end up in these must-win situations, sometimes they're a little bit more risk-adverse. And we might actually see some fight IQ from Ion Cuțelaba for the first time in his career this time. And maybe this fight squeezes over that 1.5. So I am not betting this total at all whatsoever. But if I had to bet it, I would be going under 1.5 at plus 125, or rather maybe the, you know what, never mind. I wouldn't pay chalk for the alternate total on this one. That would be a terrible idea. Main event, light heavyweight fight. Anthony Smith taking on Ryan Spann. My guy Smith, we all know how he operates. He's got a weakness for the grappling. If you can get in on this guy's legs, he is going straight to his back. He has no problem playing jiu-jitsu, but he gets stuck under these big, strong, heavy 205ers and has no answer for the wrestling. Ryan Spann, solid wrestler, big-time power in this guy's hands. He likes to put people away. He likes to do that early. But when he gets extended, he kind of falls apart, and we have yet to see that he can go beyond the second round without completely falling apart. And if you fall apart against Anthony Smith, you're going down. That man will absolutely take you out of there if it gets to the third or the fourth round and you show any signs of weakness. Total here set at 2.5. The over is plus 120. The under is minus 140. And I kind of got to side with the under here. I feel like Spann is a dude that's going to come out hard and early. And when he does, it's going to be fight or flight from Anthony Smith. And I don't know that Spann can keep up a wrestling game plan for 15 straight minutes, much less 25 straight minutes. If he doesn't get Anthony Smith out of here in the first round, like I said, I think Anthony Smith takes this fight over as soon as Spann starts to slow down. And if that's the case, if it gets to round 3, I think Smith finishes. If it gets to round 4, I absolutely think Smith finishes. So round 2 is kind of that sweet spot where pretty much anything could happen, and I think this thing is violence made. So under 2.5, minus 140 for the main event. That's the way I'd be looking. That's the Total Takedown, everybody. Thank you very much for tuning in. Tomorrow, we've got the undefeated post-weigh-in show right back here at Pub Sports Radio. Make sure you smash that like button for me. Subscribe if you haven't. We are this close to 10K subscribers here at Pub Sports Radio, so we appreciate you and everything you do. Let's roll.